The president giving an update on the war with Iran, saying the ceasefire is, quote, on massive life support. The president also reiterated that he has a plan and that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The president saying he can work with Iran's moderate leadership, who he says want to make a deal. But President Trump also calls the recent proposal from Iran, quote, stupid. The president adding that he believes gas prices will, in his own words, drop like a rock when this war ends. So let's go to senior national politics reporter Jon Allen, who's been listening in from the North Lawn. John, I'll caveat this by saying this did begin as an event with the president speaking on a new maternal health initiative just off the heels of Mother's Day. But really, the bulk of these questions centered on this ongoing conflict with Iran. The president essentially calling this ceasefire unbelievably unstable. What else did he say? What were the main takeaways here?
When you use those words, Clay, the ceasefire is on massive life support. That's the huge headline out of this. There were some other things that came out here from the president in terms of what he wanted to talk to President Xi about. He's saying that it's President Xi, not himself, who wants to talk about Taiwan. Of course, the United States having maintained strategic ambiguity for many decades about whether or not it would defend Taiwan if China were to invade and try to take over Taiwan. We heard the president saying that he believes gas prices will drop precipitously once the war with Iran is over. He did not say it exactly clearly in this news briefing, but told another network today he wants to suspend the gas tax, which would, of course, take an act of Congress. And then the one other thing I thought was interesting he said today was that he believes Republicans should walk away with the midterm elections, even though most prognosticators believe that that's an uphill climb for them to continue to hold the House of Representatives after November.
Yeah, and John, as the conflict continues, there were a lot of questions, understandably, about this ceasefire, the proposal. He was asked about his thoughts on the most recent proposal. What did he say?
He said that it was a stupid proposal. He said it wasn't a good proposal. And he basically, interestingly, said that he does believe that he can work with Iran's leadership right now. Of course, the United States has been trying to continue negotiations with Iran's leadership, and at the same time divided that leadership into the moderates and what he called the lunatics, defining the lunatics as people who want to continue to fight a war against the United States past the point at which he believes Iran has been obliterated. The Iranians obviously have a much different view of that.
Yeah, and John, this is not happening in a vacuum. The president has a highly anticipated and delayed meeting in China. He was asked about his expectations for that meeting with President Xi. What did he say?
Not much, Clay. I think he was doing a very good job of trying to avoid answering questions in a way that would prejudice those negotiations. He said, as he often does, that he has a great relationship with President Xi. He attacked his predecessor, Joe Biden, for not having been tough, and for President Xi not respecting Joe Biden, according to Trump, but basically avoided the major questions. And even on that issue of Taiwan, which is something that I think a lot of people in the United States expect the American president to bring up, he said that he thought President Xi would care more about that than he does.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.